Welcome to Cues and Views, first on the web for collecting English billiard cues. Welcome to the latest in our shorter video series that we like to call Cue Splices. Now today I'd like to show you some cues and discuss one of the big four, as they were known, of the great billiards players that played in the 1920s and 30s. Played the game of billiards in this country mainly, and of course toured and played exhibitions. And this person that I would like to draw your attention to is Willie Smith, no relation to myself. Now Willie Smith was a great all-round the table billiards player. He didn't really go in for the repetitive scoring methods like some of his contemporaries like Walter Lindrum and Joe Davis. He played all-round billiards. This is a mixture of pots, cannons and in-offs to make his big breaks, and his highest ever break playing this variation of scoring method at billiards was 2,743, and this break you will see on Willie Smith billiard snooker cues along with his 2030 break. Anyway, I'll come back to the cues shortly. Now Willie Smith was born in Darlington, as I've said, in 1886, and by the time he was 15 he accepted some expenses monies for playing a match and was deemed by the professional body as a professional billiards player from that day forward. Now this incident coloured his relationship with the governing body of billiards to the extent that he was quite antagonistic towards the governing body really for the rest of his career, and possibly even, I guess, for the rest of his life. Now Willie Smith was quite long-lived, and in fact he passed away in Leeds in 1982. So Willie Smith, long-lived and a very capable billiards player in his heyday. Now he only entered the World Billiards Championships twice, in 1920 and 1923, and he won the competition on both occasions. Now when Walter Lindrum came over to this country in 1928, Willie Smith knew that Walter was going to be a supreme challenge, and actually the fact that Walter Lindrum took the title and eventually returned to Australia with the cup in 1932 almost killed professional billiards as a spectator sport, because it was so near impossible for anybody to get the trophy back from Walter. Returning to Willie Smith. Willie Smith in his career made 83 breaks over 1,000. So that's a little bit about the history, the life and times of Willie Smith as a professional billiards player. And quite an admired billiards player by many who enjoy the game because of the swashbuckling all around the table style that he played the game. Many people, he referred to records being made with repetitive scoring methods as cushion crawlers, and he was actually quite disparaging about snooker. He was a purist, a billiards purist really, and he actually called snooker that tomato game, largely because of all the reds being on the table. Because from his perspective, I guess, there'd be, with the 3 billiard balls on the table, you would see a hell of a lot of green area, and when it was full of reds and congested, he probably didn't like that. So he was very much a purist and quite a stubborn character, which I think sometimes you need that level of determination and purposeful, focus to become a top level player, and hence this is how he managed to accumulate such big breaks, playing that method of play. Now, what I have on the table, I haven't got every type of Willie Smith cue that is potentially available in my collection right now, but what I've got are the mainstays. Now, I'll start with the more readily available and cheaper to purchase cue, which is the record cue, or the career record cue as I prefer to call it. The reason I call this a career record cue is because it mentions on the plate the 83 breaks over 1,000. Now that must mean, logically it suggests strongly to me that this cue was produced once he was no longer playing competitively, because he didn't expect to make any more thousands. Why would you not? You're so close to 100 career 1,000 breaks in your career. Why would you not wait? So I believe he must have retired from competitive play, may have been playing exhibitions, almost certainly was playing some frames of snooker in those exhibitions by this time. This would be perhaps late 30s. I've spoken about this with Andy Hunter, and we both think that, and Dominic Dale, and we all think that these cues with the record badge in this design, the Peridon design cue, must have appeared either just before the war and possibly ceased production or reduced production during the war years, and then came back and had a little run perhaps just after the war. Judging by the design of the cue, that's a possibility. Now, just while we're on discussing a machine splice cue, if you were to photograph a cue, and I don't know whether you can pick this out, but we'll try and show you this. If you don't show the top of the splicers, it looks identical or almost identical in terms of the splice shape to a hand splice cue, because you can't see the top of the points. So when you're photographing such a cue to sell it, please remember we need to see the top of the points, and those points you know, obviously go all the way around. Now this is I think this is a beautiful version. It's a Thuya burst facing splice with a thin green veneer and identical badge to the badge that you find on the hand spliced versions. I say versions because there are two. Now I only have one version. I have two of these, one in maple, which I'll show you in a moment, and this one which is in ash. Now again, the wording on the badge is identical. It mentions the 83 breaks over the 1,000. It mentions his 2030 break. It also mentions on the plate the 2743 break. So it's, you know, it's quite a packed with information badge. It has a facsimile style signature. It's not a real copy of his own signature. It's a nice, beautiful looking signature. It's called a champion cue. But I prefer to call it the career record break cue because of the mention of the 83 breaks over 1,000 at the bottom. It has a tulip wood facing splice, and the grain goes in the same direction as the ash grain, which I think is a lovely touch. Sometimes people put them on at an angle so that you get a more varied pattern, but I really like the fact that the lines on the pattern go in the same direction as the cue. Hand spliced version. Sometimes you see them with best handmade cues stamped on the shaft. Beautiful hand splice cue. As I say, available in ash and maple. Right as we speak, when I'm putting this video together, there are a lot of people who believe this cue to be worth a very significant amount of money. I'm talking 4 figures. Personally, I don't believe they're worth quite that much, but they are quite exclusive. You don't see that many. Now, the alternative version of that cue, again, is virtually identical, except for the fact that it has no facing splice whatsoever. In other words, it's a 4-point ebony black buttered hand splice cue. And again, this is why I think that these cues were available just after the war, especially the black buttered version, which some people think is earlier, but I think it's the other way around. But, you know, time will tell. I think that black buttered version is later because many of them appear in hornbeam. Now, as I've said in previous articles and videos, hornbeam was known as poor man's maple, and it was used a lot after the Second World War while rationing was still in place, and it was hard to get top quality ash and maple. So it was a nice substitute. It was quite a good wood for using for cues. You see it a lot on Horace Lindrum cues, which again is a later player, and it all fits in with the idea that those cues appeared after the war. Now again, beautiful, beautiful versions. Again, you want them in full length if you can get them. You want the lacquer on them, you want them clean, and all the printing there to be on the badges ideally. Now, before the Peregrine era, Willie Smith was contracted to Burroughes and Watts. In 1924, he effectively joined the Burroughes and Watts. He was effectively almost like a roving ambassador. He was a signed up professional. He was endorsing cues. This was after he'd won the second of his World Billiards titles, which he won in 1923. Now, often you see the Burroughes and Watts cue with the brown ebony butt, which is either Indian rosewood or Macassar ebony. This particular one here is a champion cue. Again, it doesn't mention his record breaks, and almost always these are either more browny ebony, or they very rarely, and you do see them, but they very rarely jet black. And again, this says champion cue. It's absolutely beautiful. The nice thing about this one, which I managed to get hold of last year, is the fact that it's the full 58 inches long. Now, many times I come across this cue in very, very good condition, but they're almost always 56 3/4 or thereabouts. That is not considered short for that cue. In other words, it's common in the early versions to see it at 56 3/4 inches long. This one being 58, don't think it's much later, judging by the design of it. It just so happens that it's an absolutely immaculate condition and it's 58 inches long. Highly delighted to I actually gave quite a lot of money for that. Nothing in the range of this £1,000 figure that these are supposed to be fetching, but certainly, which I don't believe that they are, but certainly a nice tidy sum of money. Now, this last one here is again the Willie Smith record champion cue, but record cue. It again mentions both his major breaks. Now that means it must have been in the catalogues and available to buy round about no earlier than 1928-29, because that's when he made the break of 2030, 2030, in 1928 in a tour of Australia. So this cue, if you watch the Pathé newsreel footage, which is you can see on YouTube, you can see Willie Smith actually handling a cue that looks identical to this. And by the way, this is just under 50. I think it's just about 57 inches long. But again, I think that's okay because it's of the earlier era. And this cue mentions his two major breaks. That badge is identical that's on this cue to the badge that you see on the cue that he handles and uses himself, Willie Smith, in the Pathé newsreel footage that is on YouTube. Now that either means that he used this cue after his own cue was destroyed by the gambling fraternity in Sydney when he was due to play Walter Lindrum, and he perhaps selected one with his own badge on, and I think that's almost certainly what happened. And they asked him, an interviewer asked Willie Smith when he was around about 80 or 90 years old or thereabouts, how long it had taken him to get used to a new cue after that first cue, his massive record breaking cue and what have you, a championship winning cue. How long did it take you to get used to that new cue, Willie Smith? And he said, I'll let you know, or one day I'm hoping to do. So therefore that was a very significant happening in his life. So yeah, these cues are nice to get hold of. I respect Willie Smith as a billiards player. I think you will find that if you get a good example, you will really enjoy owning them, and they are an absolute joy to have. I'll just move over in a moment and show you the maple version of the career record cue. Every now and again a cue comes along that as a collector you're not aware of, or it's the first time you've seen it, so obviously from that moment you do become aware of it. Now, for many a year I've had the Ash Willie Smith career record cue hand spliced, and then just a few years ago I managed to get hold of a maple version, which you see here on the table in front of me. Now, I bought this cue from a gentleman who deals in cues as a hobby, more or less. He's not an out-and-out dealer, but he deals in cues as a hobby. And I bought this cue from him, Maple Willie Smith record break cue, with the 83 breaks over 1,000 badge on it, as you'll see. I'd never seen a maple one before. The condition of it was quite dry, very solid, and the full length and all that. Nice condition. The splices hadn't moved or anything like that with age, but it was very, very dry. It had been in a case, one of those metal tubes cases, for a very, very long time, and it was very dry. It needed linseed oiling and needed a gentle refurbishment to bring it back really to its best. Anyway, I'd owned this cue for a week, well, in actual fact 6 days, and my friend Dominic Dale came to visit me and he fell in love with the cue. Now at that time I didn't want to sell it. I'd only just got it. It's the only one I'd ever seen, but he loved it. So what do you do? He earns his living playing snooker, professional snooker, as you know, and I thought, well, let him have it. Anyway, I didn't let him have it, but I gave him the cue. Anyway, so I did let him have the cue, and he used the cue for quite some time, and he restored it and refurbished it to this beautiful condition that it is in now. Well, over a period of time he decided that he wanted to move on and get a more perhaps modern cue with the opportunity for a mini button and extension and all that, and he let me have the cue back, fortunately. So here you see it, one of only, I think I've now, even that was a few years ago, and I think I might have seen 3 of these in total. I've certainly definitely seen 2, and maybe the other one I've seen, I may have seen it twice when it's been owned by different people. I'm not 100% sure, because they do pass around from hand to hand. Now at the time Dominic let me have this case, which was made by Trevor White for him, and I've kept the cue and the case together. I really think it's a lovely cue. Again, I think this is tulip wood. It's darker than the other one, the other hand splice one I showed you earlier. But I do believe it's tulip wood. I don't think it's marble wood, which does tend to be more of a straw colour. I don't think it's zebrano. I do think it's tulip wood, although, as I say, it is darker. And of course these exotic timbers do vary in colour. But it's a lovely cue, lovely perfect Peridon splices. Lovely example. Now, as you may remember, the record cue is different from the Burroughes and Watts Cue that we saw earlier with the almost jet black ebony butt. These, I do believe, were post-war, perhaps all of them, and these Peridon ones, and they may have been sold by different companies, distributed from Peridon to different companies, but I'm certain by the weight stamp and by the overall look of the cue that this is a Peridon one. So I hope you've enjoyed seeing that and enjoyed this short film on Willie Smith. Very impressed with Willie Smith as a player. I like the variety of cues. The only other time you see, just as a small digression just before I finish, the only other time that you see Willie Smith's name on cues, other than the ones I've shown you today, is on Smith and Nelson cues, where sometimes you see Smith and Nelson, just the 2 surnames, which is George Nelson and Willie Smith. Sometimes on the odd machine splice cue you see the full Willie Smith. That's the only other cue that I can think of that has Willie Smith's name on it, and those 2 were made by Peridon and supplied to Smith and Nelson of Leeds. And as I said to you in the earlier part of the film, Willie Smith actually died in Leeds, so I do believe he had a close association with that company right up until his death in 1982. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this short film on Willie Smith, and I look forward to you joining me for our next Cue Splices film. Thank you.